He was sitting on the sidewalk in front of the company when the CEO heard him speaking Mandarin, Spanish, and Italian like a native. What happened next shocked the entire company. The glass and steel building rose in the heart of the financial district, imposing, elegant, and seemingly solid. Outside, its mirrored surface reflected the city's frantic pace: buzzing cars, hurried people, honking horns, coffee handed out in paper cups, and executives clutching cell phones as if every call were a matter of life or death. Inside that building, the atmosphere was very different from what it used to exude in other times. The lobby, with its polished marble floor, volcanic stone-clad walls, and carefully symmetrical flower arrangements, could no longer disguise the tension building in the air. The sound of hurried heels and fingers tapping keyboards mixed with a heavy, almost suffocating energy. At the top of this corporate empire was Leonardo Castelli, a man who had built his career turning risks into profits and problems into opportunities. Known for his almost military discipline, tailored suits, and ability to close deals with eye contact, he used to move through those hallways like a force of nature. But that day, something was different. His steps were slower. His gaze, once sharp and determined, now seemed to carry an invisible weight. Even surrounded by minimalist art, leather armchairs, and flawless glass tables, the emptiness felt larger than any physical element around him. His Swiss watch marked more than just time. It now sounded like a countdown. The company still maintained its facade of grandeur. It still appeared, from the outside, solid and unshakable. But those crossing that lobby with enough attention could see on the employees' faces that something was broken. Something was out of place. And as he climbed the steps of the main entrance, adjusting his suit jacket almost by reflex, his mind plunged into thoughts heavier than any financial balance sheet. Unknowingly, the next few minutes would make him forget, at least temporarily, all the problems occupying his thoughts. Because something absolutely improbable was about to happen. And nothing would ever be the same again. The glass walls of the company headquarters reflected not only the city outside but also the invisible pressure crushing those inside. After hours suffocating in dead-end meetings, empty proposals, and an anguish that seemed to multiply, Leonardo Castelli decided to leave. He needed to breathe. He needed to think away from the desperate eyes of employees and the claustrophobia of meeting rooms. He took the elevator down, crossed the lobby without even noticing the faces he passed, and pushed through the automatic doors to the sidewalk. The city noise, though chaotic, seemed to offer more comfort than any spreadsheet loaded with red numbers. His steps followed almost automatically, guided only by the urgent desire to clear his mind. Then, amid the honking, the voices, and the comings and goings of hurried people, something broke the flow of his thoughts. A voice. But not just any voice. It was a voice shaping words in Italian with disconcerting fluency, as natural as breathing. Leonardo's gaze turned automatically, guided more by instinct than reason. And there he was. Leaning against a concrete pillar, sitting on the ground, a man in visibly precarious conditions. Dirty, clothes torn, shoes barely holding together, and a face marked by the harshness of the streets, of abandonment, and social invisibility. Still, that man didn't appear hunched or submissive. His hands gestured with precision as he explained something to two lost tourists, who listened attentively, nodding in understanding and relief. And before Leonardo could even process what he was seeing, the scene escalated. The Italian gave way to perfect German. Strong, structured words came from someone who, by any quick judgment, shouldn't even know how to read. The shock froze his steps. It was a collision between everything he believed about the world and that raw, imposed, impossible to ignore reality. But the final blow came seconds later when an old phone, held together with electrical tape, vibrated on the man's lap. He answered and, effortlessly, began to speak in Mandarin. The fluency, the confidence, the absolute command of that complex language left no room for doubt. Leonardo felt small in the face of that scene. Small, ignorant, and, for the first time in a long time, deeply disconnected from his own worldview. Unknowingly, something inside him began to shift at that moment. An idea started to form. And what was about to happen in the following minutes would forever change not just that man's life, but also the corporate empire Leonardo thought he was about to lose. The impact of that scene didn't fade quickly. On the contrary, it seemed to grow inside Leonardo Castelli like pressure on his chest, an unease that wouldn't let him look away. Driven by a force he didn't fully understand, he approached. It was no longer simple curiosity. It was an uncomfortable urgency, as if something there was directly tied to his own survival, even if his mind hadn't fully grasped it yet. Up close, he could see the brutal contrast in that figure. Worn clothes, hands marked by the roughness of asphalt, deep eyes carrying a mix of exhaustion and dignity. A dignity that time, the streets, and collective disdain had not yet managed to strip away. There was a posture in him unlike others who stood on street corners asking for change. No self-pity, just presence. Someone who, even crushed by circumstances, refused to be erased from himself. That was when, between questions, exchanged looks, and silences heavy with meaning, emerged the name the world seemed to have forgotten, Samuel Rodriguez. A name that, at some point in the past, had occupied conference rooms, international contracts, and bilingual meetings. Now, however, that same name barely survived, nearly erased on the margins of society. The story that began to unfold seemed written to test the limits of human resilience. Samuel grew up in a simple family obsessed with education. From an early age, he demonstrated an extraordinary ability to learn languages. What was effort for many seemed like instinct for him. He graduated with honors, collected certifications, worked in international trade companies, provided consultancy, traveled the world, breathed cultures, and mastered linguistic structures like second nature. But the world, cruel in its unpredictability, stripped him of all emotional support. He lost his parents in a tragic accident. Months later, the sudden death of his only son shattered what was left of his soul. Grief became weight, and the weight became a fall. Bills piled up. Jobs vanished. Life turned into a cycle of loss, isolation, and eventually, abandonment. The streets consumed him. Still, Samuel never let go of what couldn't be stolen: his brain, his sharp mind, his love for words, for sounds, for the invisible threads that connect cultures and people. He read newspapers found in the trash in various languages, tuned into portable radios, mentally corrected misspelled signs by tourists, and whenever possible, helped those who crossed his path, not for money, but to remind himself he still existed. Each piece of that story fell on Leonardo like an anchor. The realization that the entire world, including himself, walked past people like Samuel every day without seeing, without imagining the greatness hidden beneath a torn coat. And as he absorbed it all, an idea that had started as an annoying noise in the back of his mind now began to take shape, gain clarity, and most of all, urgency. Because maybe, just maybe, that invisible man named Samuel Rodriguez unknowingly carried the key to saving something Leonardo thought was already lost. The invitation came directly, without preamble. Driven by a conviction he didn't even know the origin of, Leonardo Castelli simply looked at Samuel Rodriguez and decided to take him inside. Not to a cafe, not for a quick sidewalk chat, but to see his company, from the imposing building, to the marble-lined hallways, to the glass offices where only those with expensive suits and prestigious surnames had walked until then. As they crossed the automatic doors, the effect was instant and devastating. Samuel's presence, with his worn-out clothes, shoes with barely any soles, and a face marked by time on the streets, tore through the invisible fabric of normality the place tried to uphold. Eyes darted from every corner. Faces turned in sync, as if a silent storm had just swept through the lobby. Within seconds, phones were discreetly lifted. Short videos, quick photos, and messages spread like wildfire through internal chats. In the hallways, discomfort became fuel for prejudice. Acid whispers, muffled laughter, and disgusted expressions mingled like an orchestra of hypocrisy. Some employees averted their eyes, others stared with pure disdain, and some simply moved away, as if physical proximity could contaminate them. The humiliation, up to that point made of looks and whispers, materialized brutally at reception. One of the HR leaders, known for her elegant demeanor and rehearsed smile, approached with a carefully crafted expression, a mix of fake empathy and barely hidden disgust. Without asking anything, she extended a crumpled bill towards Samuel, like offering charity to someone who didn't belong there. The gesture, heavy with disguised revulsion, was paired with a look that screamed he did not belong. The shame spreading across the room was almost tangible. It felt as if the air had become denser, impossible to breathe. The uncomfortable silence was only interrupted by the sound of vibrating phones, filled with memes, jokes, and real-time videos, as if human dignity could be treated as entertainment. But while everyone watched, expecting that scene to end the only way they knew, Samuel being expelled, ignored, or humiliated, something completely off-script happened. Leonardo Castelli not only stayed by his side, but walked firmly, leading Samuel inward, to the upper floors where only the elite were allowed. Each step seemed a direct challenge to decades of toxic corporate culture. And if anyone there believed, even for a second, that this was a joke or a passing stunt, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Because at that moment, as discomfort spread like wildfire, Leonardo already knew exactly what he was going to do. And Samuel was about to be given the chance life had always denied him. The test was about to begin. And no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what was coming. The sound of the elevator doors opening on the executive floor felt almost symbolic. As employees held their breath, caught between outrage, disbelief, and pure curiosity, Leonardo Castelli led Samuel Rodriguez through the corridors once reserved only for top-tier executives, investors, and directors. With each step, the contrast became starker. The immaculate hardwood floors, mirrored panels, minimalist art, and designer furniture all seemed to scream that this was no place for someone like Samuel. But, ironically, it was exactly where he belonged. Destiny, however, did not wait. And the opportunity Samuel so richly deserved came faster than anyone could have imagined. Upon arriving in one of the meeting rooms, Leonardo was immediately informed of an unfolding crisis. A foreign delegation, responsible for a crucial contract that could save the company from bankruptcy, was about to walk away from the negotiations. The problem? The contract had been stalled for weeks due to translation errors, communication failures, and a series of cultural misunderstandings that no one in the company, no matter how qualified, had managed to resolve. The tension was so intense that if the deal wasn't closed within hours, it would be the final blow sealing the company's downfall. And it was at that critical edge between collapse and hope that Leonardo made a decision many would call madness. He put Samuel in that room. Not as an observer. Not as an assistant. But as the person with the chance to unlock the impossible. The moment Samuel began to speak, something almost supernatural took over the room. His body, once hunched by life on the streets, seemed to straighten. His voice took on a firmness that no suit in the building could match. Words flowed in Italian, then German, then Mandarin, each shaped with surgical precision, adapting not just the language but the cultural nuances, the right expressions, the appropriate gestures. The foreign executives, moments from leaving it all behind, began leaning forward, genuinely paying attention. The tension in the room began to melt. Hardened expressions softened. Hands that had been drumming impatiently on the table now held pens, adjusted documents, made notes. Little by little, deadlocked negotiations came back to life. Long-standing problems that no one had managed to fix were clarified in minutes. Misinterpreted clauses were corrected. Previously offensive demands were finally understood in their real context. The impossible was happening before the eyes of an entire executive board that, minutes earlier, believed this man didn't even belong in the building. And when the papers were finally signed, when hands were shaken and smiles exchanged, there was no room left for doubt. Samuel hadn't just saved a negotiation. He had, literally, saved the company from certain collapse. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was collective shame. The cruel realization that, for years, that entire building had been blind. And as Samuel calmly gathered the documents from the table, like one clearing a chessboard after a victorious match, one truth became clear to all. He would never be invisible again. But what no one imagined was that this was only the beginning. The silence that engulfed the company after that contract was signed was no longer one of disbelief. It was one of transformation. What everyone had witnessed that day wasn't just the saving of a negotiation, nor merely the reversal of an impending bankruptcy. It was the live, real-time deconstruction of everything that company, and perhaps society, believed about value, merit, and capability. But for Leonardo Castelli, that wasn't enough. Because even though Samuel Rodriguez had just saved the company, it was clear that years of pain, grief, rejection, and survival had left deep scars, scars that couldn't be erased with a new badge or a fancy job title. That's when Leonardo made a decision he might never have even considered in earlier times. Samuel would not leave with just a job. He would leave with a rebuilt life. That very same day, without consulting anyone or seeking board approval, Leonardo hired a team of mental health specialists. Psychologists, therapists, and support professionals were immediately mobilized. Samuel would have access to full, comprehensive, continuous care, not as a corporate benefit, but as a form of reparative justice for a debt society had silently and cruelly accumulated against him. In the days that followed, Samuel underwent a transformation that went far beyond appearances, though it began, indeed, with the visible restoration of his dignity. Carefully trimmed hair, a clean shave, custom-tailored clothes, and shoes that, for the first time in years, didn't hurt his feet. The reflection in the mirror no longer showed only the features of a man almost swallowed by the streets. Now, it also reflected the weight and pride of someone who had become seen, heard, and, above all, respected. But Leonardo knew the story couldn't end there. Because if Samuel existed, someone invisible for years right under everyone's nose, how many others existed too? How many talents, how many extraordinary intelligences were being wasted simply because no one cared to look beyond the surface? And so, the Horizon program was born. A revolutionary project designed to map, identify, and rescue invisible talents. People outside the traditional molds, outside the perfect resumes, outside prestigious universities, but who carried within them skills, knowledge, and potential the market had never even considered. The program's launch was met with surprise, resistance, and also admiration. While some executives turned up their noses, clinging to elitist beliefs, others began to understand that this change wasn't just ethical, it was smart. Because talent has no uniform, no fixed address, no diploma on the wall. Samuel's badge now bore not just his name but also a title no one would ever dare question again: International Consultant and Cultural Relations Leader. His office on the 12th floor had a view of the city that had ignored him for so long. And in the drawer, neatly folded, he kept an old, worn-out piece of clothing that he made a point never to forget. Not out of attachment to the past, but as a daily reminder that dignity should never be a privilege. And as he looked out the window, watching life outside, Samuel knew what started with his story was now becoming an open door for hundreds, perhaps thousands of others. Because from that moment on, never again would anyone be invisible. Subscribe to the channel to watch the next story that will bring tears to your eyes. See you next time.